Look at Blom. Well done. Gets
Wow.
another great fold at this final table. It's been the name of the game today.
Awesome folds, definitely dictating the narrative here at this final table.
Hello, welcome to today's lecture. I'm Bekon, and today we're gonna look at a few big folds made on the final table of 50k WSOP tournament by some of the best players that ever played this game. Let's jump into the action. Our first hand starts with chip leader Sergio Aido opening on the hijack and chance Kornuth 3-betting from the button. When we look at pre-flop ranges, we can see that chip leader can be pretty wide and the button should mostly 3-bet with some all-ins mixed in. Solver wants to fold most combos of ace-10 off, but raising is an option. It gets better if we think that chip leader is getting out of line, but when we look at hijack's response to our 3-bet, we see that there is a lot of 4-betting. Almost 3/4 of continuing range wants to rip it in, and we don't really want to either 3-bet and call or 3-bet and fold when our opponent can have all the worst aces and even some dominated tens. Ace-jack off is folding most of the time, but it's also one of the few hands that could end up as a call, and that's what happens in the hand. On the flop, we see a small c-bet. It is preferred sizing with most of the range, but what is also interesting, button could just go all in on the flop, with all ace-queens and some other aces. Solver wants to check back some strong hands like pocket aces and also checking back with all ace-tens. Sergio should go all in with almost all ace-jacks and call just a few combos when holding jack of diamonds that give him some more equity with backdoor options. On the turn, with SPR less than 1 and a lot of hands having some serious equity, chance should be barreling all his aces that made 2 pairs. For example, ace-4 suited is pure jam and ace-king mixes between 2 sizings, but is never checking back. On the brick river, button should be value betting all his 2 pairs and better, and hijack should be folding most of his hands. He can comfortably call the top set, and that's pretty much it. To not overfold, solver wants to call some of his best ace-x and uses ace-jack off over ace-queen off because it unblocks queens, which is the most common GTO bluff. Either way, it's a very close and hard spot for Sergio, but after 2 minutes of thinking he made this laydown that saved him some chips. Second hand starts with Isildur trying to steal a big blind from Jesse Lonis. Quick look at pre-flop ranges to see that both plays are GTO approved. Viktor, when covering Jesse, can be very aggressive in that spot and the big blinds should be pretty tight, folding almost half of his hands in position. There is some 3-betting and even 3-bet jamming with ace-queen off and some offsuit kings, which is pretty wild considering he would be risking almost 50 big blinds and his tournament life. If you want to simplify flop strategy for small blind on that board, we could basically flip a coin and bet or check based on the result, and we wouldn't be far off GTO. When we look at big blind response, we can see that versus small sizing there is not much folding or raising going on, so after a call both players can have literally their whole pre-flop range carried to the next street. On the turn, small blind wants to bet with very high frequency, using mostly smaller sizing. But if we look at exactly king-4 off, it's a hand that can do whatever. We can roll a 4-sided dice and either check or bet with small, medium or big sizing. GTO in a nutshell. Versus bet sizing used in game, Jesse should start folding some worst hands, almost all broadways and some other unpaired hands. Ace-3 suited is still a pure call according to the solver. Queen on the river is better for small blind, because lots of bluffs pair up, and the big blind fold most queens on the turn, so he can justify barreling with high frequency. Overall strategy is pretty simple. He wants to check all ace-highs and paired threes, because betting them would be too thin. With all paired sixes, he should use block bet sizing. With pairs between 6 and jack, he can use medium sizing, balancing it with some bluffs around these cards, like jack 10 or 10-9. With paired queens and better, he can justify going all in on this river. His all-in bluffs should be hands that block straights, lots of hands that include a 5 or a deuce. If we look at king-4 off, it should be betting either small or overbetting, so it's a small misstep by online legend. Big blind facing a medium-sized bet has a really tough decision with ace-3 of spades. Solver wants to call this hand to not overfold the river. This hand has pretty good properties to bluff catch because it beats all the bluffs and doesn't block any of them. And it's a better call than, for example, ace-jack or even some paired sixes. After 3 minutes of tanking, he finds a fold that is not solver approved, but very good versus the exact hand of his opponent. In the very next hand, our action starts with chance Kornuth opening ace-king off on the cutoff. Jesse Lonis, covering both players left to act, decided to jam his pocket fives from the small blind. When we look at GTO range, this play is a bit too wild. Fives should either fold or call, but we can see that there is some jamming in that spot, and for example with sixes there is some frequency of all-ins, so this play can't be too bad in theory. He gets bad news after big blind wakes up with a monster hand. Adrian should be calling here with less than 5% of hands, with pairs 8s or better and ace-kings. He is the shortest stack, and because small blinds shouldn't be jamming any pairs better than 8s, he will be either flipping or dominating small blinds range. When action got back to chance, he took his time to lay down his hand. When we look at what a solver would do, we see that it would call 10s plus and ace-king. If we look closer, solver actually calls only 99% of ace-kings, so this is a very close spot. He folded and was right, but in the GTO world, this is a good spot to gamble. There are few possible scenarios. He could triple up, and that is of course best case. But he could also call and lose to Mateos and win versus Jesse, that would cripple small blind and leave him with a playable stack. He could also bust to Jesse together with Adrian, and that would give him a pay jump anyway. There is only one awful scenario where he busts to Jesse and triple up Adrian. But for solver it's not enough to fold ace-king off. Anyway, chance made very hard fold to live another day, and as we can see, being result oriented, he made a good decision. Our last hand starts with Jesse opening from first position with ace-7 off and Viktor defending 8-5 suited. When we look at solver ranges, we can see that it's not very close and Lonis is a few pips away from GTO opening range. On the flop, with so low SPR, solver wants to c-bet with small sizing only. Even though Jesse has very strong range here, he cannot bet all his hands, because this certain flop is much better for big blind when it comes to nut advantage. Big blind can have more sets and a lot of two pairs, and Jesse should have more over pairs, but when it comes to sets, he should only have 3 combos of top set and literally 0 two-pair combos. Because he shouldn't have ace-7 off, let's look at ace-7 suited. He shouldn't bet any with backdoor flush draw, because these hands want to realize equity and don't want to bet fold. When we look at big blind response, 8-5 suited is a good candidate for slow play, so a very nice trap by Isildur. Things change on the turn. 6 of the clubs brings some straight draws and also a flush draw to the board, and this card is much better for big blind. He can donk bet this card quite a lot, and with exactly 8-5 of diamonds, solver prefers betting over checking. Versus check, preflop aggressor on this card should either check with most of his range or go all in with most vulnerable overpairs and some of the best bluffs like ace-6 with combo draw. On the river we get a card that completes flush draw and also completes some straight draws. This is much better for big blind, and we can see that he should bet with almost 3/4 of his range. He has all the straights and many flushes. With exactly 8-5 there is some checking going on. Hijack should check back this river most of the time. There are almost no straights in his range, because only 7s that are solver approved to open are ace-7 suited and pocket 7s. He shouldn't have many flushes either, because most of them either check back on the flop or barrel on the turn. We see a bet from Jesse, and Isildur, according to the solver, should check jam his hand for value. But he had a better idea and folded when he was beaten, after just 1 minute of thinking. Some people would say that this might not be the best advertisement for solvers, because in all 4 hands they would lose chips while humans avoided some losses. You have to remember that 4 hands is not a serious sample size, and also that in the long run solver would crush all these players. But we can also draw different conclusions from these hands and implement it into our game. When there is very close decision, and all these spots discussed today were on the verge, whether to call or fold, best players tend to fold their hands because they assume that opposition isn't bluffing enough, and most of the time it's good assumption. The lesson from this is, don't shy away from big bluffs against best players, because they don't expect you to bluff enough, and as you can see, they're capable of folding very strong holdings. I hope you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe and see you next time. Bye!